Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise, give you those essential insights you need to really grasp what's shaping our world today. Think of it like a global chessboard, right? But the pieces are suddenly moving in really unexpected ways. New alliances popping up, old orders getting a serious rethink.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that's exactly the world we're diving into.
Today we're plunging into the fascinating rise of BRICS.
Right. Not just the original 5 nations anymore.
No, exactly. It's this rapidly expanding coalition that's really making waves, actively reshaping potentially the future of global power.
Definitely reshaping.
So our mission for you, our listener, is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge. We've got a pretty compelling stack of sources here.
We do. Insights from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, reports from places like Al Jazeera, Responsible Statecraft.
Economic data from the Tax Foundation, academic research on IR theory,
Yeah.
a real mix. And we'll unpack what BRICS is becoming, why countries are, practically clamoring to join, it seems,
There's a lot of interest.
and what its growth truly means for the U.S., for the wider international system. Okay, let's get into it.
Okay. So BRICS has certainly had a major growth spurt recently.
That's putting it mildly.
Right. At their summit in Kazan, Russia, that was October 2024, the original 5, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
The originals, yeah.
They officially welcomed 4 new members: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE.
And then Indonesia joined just this past January, making it 10.
Exactly. January 2025, Indonesia became the 10th full member.
That's incredibly rapid growth. And look, it's not stopping there, is it?
No, not at all. We're seeing 9 other nations now called partner countries.
Partner countries, okay.
And on top of that, maybe 24 more countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey. They've either been invited or shown serious interest.
Wow. And Russia, the sources say Russia's hailing this as a defining moment.
They are. Proclaiming the dawn of a post-Western world order. That's the language they're using.
Strong words. They're even claiming BRICS has now surpassed the G7 in GDP and population.
That's the claim, yeah. Based on certain metrics, particularly PPP, GDP, and population size. Now, what's really fascinating here, the core question experts are debating.
Yeah.
Does this expansion signal a turn against the West, like forming a coherent anti-Western bloc?
Well,
or is it maybe simpler, just the turn away from the West, a platform for, reformist aims, but without those rigid divisions?
and things like U.S.-China tensions, Trump's more confrontational approach, those are seen as pushing it towards the against camp.
Exactly. Those factors are definitely cited as pushing things in that direction, potentially.
And this seems crucial. It's not a monolith, right? The sources really hammer this point.
Absolutely not. Heterogeneity is key. You look at the members, they're incredibly diverse. Many still have very strong ties, cooperation with Western countries, other middle powers.
So it's not just black and white, not just opposition.
Far from it. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, there's a common thread, though, despite the diversity. A shared desire, really, to respond to, maybe manage, the consequences of American dominance.
Okay. So what does that look like in practice?
Well, seeking a kind of safe harbor, maybe, from U.S. diplomatic pressure, economic statecraft.
Sanctions, tariffs?
Exactly. And escape from pressure to democratize, maybe, for some. A way to lessen the blow of sanctions and tariffs. Even countries with good U.S. ties see value here.
How so?
They see BRICS as a vehicle for more international economic integration, but outside that Western-centric system, and maybe a chance for more influence than they'd get in traditional forum.
And for developing countries?
You're right.
What's the pull?
That's a big one. Development financing, but without the political strings often attached by Western institutions.
And in local currencies, right? Not just dollars or euros?
Crucially, yes, in local currencies. So ultimately, there is a clear consensus among BRICS nations on one thing: shifting the global power balance away from what they see as American unipolarity.
Okay, so that's the shared ground. But why are so many lining up? Well, let's unpack the individual motivations. Maybe start with the originals. Brazil, for instance. They always seem to play this sophisticated balancing act.
They do. And Brazilian policymakers, the sources suggest, they really value the prestige BRICS membership brings. It kind of implicitly equates Brazil with giants like China, India, Russia.
Right. Status matters.
And there's a belief in Brazil that they can actually influence global institutions, the UN, G20 from within BRICS, and support new ones like the BRICS New Development Bank, the NDB.
And they've historically been skeptical of U.S. unipolarity.
Deeply skeptical, yes. BRICS also functions as a sort of mutual diplomatic support group, giving backing during tough times, periods of isolation.
Interesting. And Brazil's using its upcoming BRICS presidency in 2025 to navigate this tricky landscape.
Yeah.
Trump's potential return? U.S.-China rivalry.
That's the plan. Crafting a multi-aligned strategy, trying to steer the bloc away from becoming purely anti-Western.
Okay. What about Russia? For them, it feels much more like a survival strategy, especially under sanctions.
Oh, absolutely. Moscow needs to be seen as part of something dynamic, something shaping this post-American world order.
Highlighting the global majority idea, the G7 comparison.
Exactly. For Russia, BRICS is almost like a sandbox, a place to develop trade, finance, investment tools outside U.S. control.
De-dollarization, swift alternatives.
Precisely. It's directly linked to escaping Western sanctions, keeping economic lifelines open.
And India. They seem to be playing a different game. Multi-alignment.
Mm-hmm. India uses BRICS as another stage, an alternative platform for leadership, for status. It fits their vision of a multipolar world.
And it lets them claim leadership of the global south, especially now with all the new members.
It certainly helps that claim, yes. And it demonstrates India's preference for flexible, issue-based partnerships, while, crucially, preserving its valuable ties with the West. They're hedging.
Hedging. And there are material benefits, too. The NDB, the CRA.
India expects those institutions, the New Development Bank and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, to provide new lending sources, help democratize global finance as they see it.
And continued engagement is also a hedge against U.S. uncertainty, especially with Trump potentially returning.
That's a key calculation for New Delhi, yes. Strategic uncertainty requires hedging.
Okay, China. BRICS seems like a core strategic tool for Beijing.
A strategic bridge is how some analysts put it. Beijing uses the bloc to harness, maybe shape, non-Western power, aiming to reform the international order as they see the West declining relatively and the global South rising.
Coordinating non-Western positions, institutionalizing cooperation, a force multiplier for their influence.
Exactly, acting as a force multiplier. And like others, it's an economic hedge for China against Western decoupling threats.
Strengthening energy security, food, critical minerals, supply chains.
All of that. And mitigating potential Western sanctions down the line, plus promoting de-dollarization and the RMB, China's currency.
But it's not all straightforward even for China. Concerns about consensus with so many members.
Right. Chinese strategists are practical. They do question how easy consensus will be with 10, maybe more members. There's even talk, apparently, of needing an exit mechanism for states that don't align.
An exit mechanism. Wow, okay. South Africa, what's their angle?
South Africa uses BRICS to, well, shape global debates, challenge Western narratives on development, governance, security. They're big proponents of financial alternatives.
Reducing exposure to volatile global finance, trading in local currencies.
And they want to position themselves as a gateway to Africa, especially now with Ethiopia and Egypt in the bloc, plus promoting collaboration in research, tech, education alternatives to Western institutions.
Okay, let's touch on some of the new members. Their reasons must be varied, too.
Very much so. Many, like Egypt and Ethiopia, you see a strong focus on finding alternative development finance, investments. Looking beyond Western institutions they might see as biased or too conditional. Indonesia. They frame it as strategic diversification. Not abandoning their traditional free and active foreign policy, but opening doors to new markets, funding, tech transfer.
And then there's Iran. This is where it gets really interesting, as the sources note.
Yeah, Iran's perspective is stark. Heavily sanctioned, they see BRICS as a vital counterweight, geopolitically and economically, to the West.
Explicitly aiming to eliminate the dollar in trade, seeing NDB-CRA as alternatives to the World Bank IF.
Absolutely. And hoping to diversify partners for their oil and gas, maybe lessen dependence on China.
And that point about Trump viewing his potential return as an opportunity.
It's quite remarkable, seeing it as a chance to further polarize America internally, blunt U.S. power externally, applauding his instincts to withdraw troops, cut foreign aid. It's a very specific viewpoint.
Wow. Okay. The UAE.
Another new member.
The UAE uses BRICS to expand strategic autonomy, diversify economic partners. China and India are now huge trading partners for them, addressing globalization imbalances.
Advocating for UN reform, Security Council reform, local currency trade. And even Saudi Arabia, invited but not yet a full member, sees it pragmatically. An approach to multipolarity, advancing collective global south priorities, economic cooperation, energy security, more representation, calling for reforms of Western institutions.
So the collective message coming out of BRICS is getting louder, more assertive.
Definitely. Look at their Rio summit, July 2025. Some very firm geopolitical stances taken.
They sharply rebuked U.S. and Israeli actions against Iran, called it a blatant breach of international law.
Yes, and voiced strong support for a Palestinian state, denounced using starvation as a weapon, supported UNRWA.
But interestingly, the declaration was largely silent on the Russia-Ukraine war, where Russia is the aggressor.
Largely silent on Russia's role, yes, but it did criticize Ukrainian attacks on Russian soil. So a very specific framing there.
And economically. They condemned unilateral tariffs, barriers, basically a critique of Trump's protectionism, even if not naming him.
A clear, though indirect, critique, absolutely. Skewing global trade, flouting WTO rules, that was the language.
And Trump's response came fast, didn't it?
Within hours. On Truth Social, warning any country aligning with BRICS's anti-American policies would face an additional 10% tariff. No exceptions.
Wow. So direct confrontation there. The BRICS declaration also hit out strongly against unilateral sanctions.
Very strongly. Condemned unilateral coercive measures, arguing they violate international law, harm human rights, pointing fingers clearly at measures against Iran and Russia.
Which brings us nicely, I suppose, to the economic ripple effects of these tariffs, Trump's tariffs specifically.
Right. He has a track record of threatening and imposing broad tariffs, using things like the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, against Canada, Mexico, China.
Plus national security tariffs on cars, steel, aluminum.
Exactly. And the legal status is messy. One court said some IEPA tariffs were illegal, but a higher court let them stay in effect pending more arguments. So uncertainty there.
But the economic impact seems less uncertain.
Economists are pretty much agreed on the basics. Tariffs tend to mean higher prices for consumers, reduced economic output overall, and job losses, even potentially in the sectors they're meant to protect.
And they trigger retaliation, right?
Inevitably. China, Canada, the EU, they've all hit back or announced plans to.
Yeah.
Which disrupts global trade even more, puts another drag on economic activity.
So you have this shifting global order, blocs like BRICS asserting themselves.
Yeah.
And it really brings up a domestic question here in the U.S., doesn't it?
How so?
Well, how prepared is the U.S. to navigate all this, especially when you look at the revolving door issue in Washington, foreign policy expertise cycling between government and the private sector?
Ah, yes. The sources do highlight that. Quite a few Biden administration officials, particularly in defense policy, moving very quickly into high-paying private sector jobs.
And there's this strategic consulting loophole. Lets them advise companies without registering as lobbyists, avoiding cooling-off periods.
Exactly. That loophole is key. And it's worth noting, Trump had actually revoked an earlier executive order that tried to close that loophole, making these quick transitions easier.
We've seen some pretty big names make the jump. Former Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin launching clarion strategies to court defense clients.
That's one example. Another is Derek Chollet, former top Middle East advisor joining J.P. Morgan Chase, leading a center for geopolitics that advocates for bigger defense budgets, specific weapons, from companies that are J.P. Morgan clients like Lockheed Martin.
Right. And Brett McGurk, another former Middle East advisor, joining a VC firm invested in defense tech, then arguing on CNN for bombing Iran.
Yes, that example was cited too. These kinds of moves, officials joining defense contractors or advisory firms serving them, it raises concerns.
Right.
Senators Warren, Rick Scott, others have voiced concerns about potential conflicts of interest.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. The deep dive's final thoughts. What's the big picture takeaway on BRICS?
Well, it's clearly multifaceted, an increasingly influential bloc, no doubt. Driven by diverse national interests, sure, but definitely united by this desire for a more multipolar world.
And they talk about establishing an alternative model of world order, rejecting discriminatory and hierarchical relations.
That's the language they use. And you can look at it through different theoretical lenses, from international relations.
Like power transition theory, seeing Russia and China as revisionist states, challenging the U.S.-led order.
Some analysts frame it that way, yeah. With other BRICS members as maybe moderate revisionists, others focus on BRICS' updated idea of peaceful coexistence, different systems living side by side, rejecting dominance, preferring soft power.
And status theories, nations caring about respect, standing.
Absolutely. That plays a role too. Russia's status panic after the USSR, China seeking global respect, others pursuing regional influence. It's all part of the mix.
So the bottom line is this reshaping of global influence is significant.
Incredibly significant. The expansion, the assertive stance, the individual strategies, it all points to a major shift away from traditional Western dominance.
And it's allowed countries like Russia to avoid total isolation, despite everything.
That's a clear consequence, yes.
Yeah.
They've found alternative partners, alternative forums.
So as we watch these powerful nations charting their own course, challenging norms, it leaves us with a question, doesn't it, for you, the listener? What does this evolving multipolar world order truly demand of us as individuals, as nations, in terms of understanding, adapting, maybe even rethinking our own priorities, our alliances?
Yeah, that's definitely a question worth exploring long after this deep dive's over.